I usually start the tour with a true but rather implausible statement. This is the second oldest family-owned brewery in the United States today. Well, we're in the middle of the continent. This doesn't make sense from geography, nothing else. What happened to all those breweries east of here, some of them that started in the 1700s or even earlier? Well, the 20th century happened to them. That's the short story. I'll mention how that happened in a few minutes here. This picture, this poster from 15 years ago, you can tell the whole story of the brewery from this thing. That's what I'm going to do. And we've got a few minutes here before they want to start another tour. So, as you can see, we've been through some stuff. Start with August over in the corner, our founder. He was born in Durbach, a village in Bavaria on the edge of the Black Forest, in 1828. His dad was a game warden for a local aristocrat. Those were the days when aristocrats was never. It was a pretty good job. But when Carl, his father, died, August was 11 years old. At that point, you got apprenticed to be a machinist. And when you were apprenticed to the various crafts type people in those days, usually then you slept in the shop underneath the machines.
Wow.
And so, I think that was his life for a good number of years. But you got to think about the time frame here too. This would be about 1839 or 1840. The beginnings of the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, sure.
All of them built on machines, all of which are made by machinists.
Sure.
Nobody else. They don't just happen on their own. And it's a tough skill to learn. He learned his lessons well. He was good. At the age of 20, he moved to the United States for whatever reason, we're not sure exactly. He got off the boat in New Orleans, which also always confuses me a little bit. Until I had a woman on the tour here about a year ago. She said she had an ancestor who would come the same passage the same year. She said, well, the ticket was a lot cheaper. If you wanted the shorter passage over to New York, you paid a premium price.
Sure.
Well, I got him as a young man to the middle of the continent. He worked his way up the rivers until he could reach his destination, which was Cincinnati.
Cool.
Great place to go if you spoke German. About 30% of the town did too.
Right.
Very fast growing industrial center as well. So perfect for a guy with these skills. He got a job at Locomotive Works right away, which is a good job. The social life revolved around the Turner Society there. Turners are a social organization, if you haven't come across them before. Started in the old country in the early 1800s. In the United States, they were one of the organizations that kind of formed the welcoming committee for gymnasts. Turner means gymnast in German, so there was that gymnastics group. They had all kinds of stuff at Turner Hall. They'd have lectures, which is a popular entertainment of the day. They had balls and parties. They had masked balls at times. And they did what we can consider community theater. A lot of Turner Halls had a large space devoted to costumes. And so they enacted these plays here in New Orleans years ago. That's why it was a social center. They were not religious too. They weren't fanatical in religion. They were free thinkers. Well, that's where he met his wife Teresa. They married in Cincinnati. Had their first 2 children there. But in the 1850s, middle 1850s, them along with a number of other people from Turner moved to this brand new town. The Turners wanted to start a town of their own, and they finally got their chance with New Orleans. They ended up working with a development company out of Chicago that wasn't terribly well funded, but the Turners had the money to finish the project. Eventually, the 2 groups merged, and we got New Orleans. So it was founded in 1854, but it took a couple of years for the surveyors to get everything in place. If you're going to sell somebody a building lot to build on, you have to define what a lot is.
Sure.
So the surveyors had a lot of work to do. But in 1856, then, people started moving in that summer, including the Schell family. He worked at the flour mill, the development company placed here. And mainly because it was run by a small steam engine, and you could keep that running, fix it. He ended up handling grain and timber and farmers and all the other things you're supposed to know. But he kept looking for other business opportunities, and brewing kept popping in front of his mind. He kept thinking we need a better brewery. Now they had brewers from the very beginning, but these were one-person operations and highly unreliable. The guy got a bad batch, he might just take his kettle and disappear overnight, end up in Wisconsin somewhere. They can keep him. Well, Schell wanted something a little more industrial. In fact, there's a photograph of what they ended up with there, with the horses in front. The larger building on the right is the brew house. The smaller building with the windows in it on the left, that's the family home. That's the Schell family home. Built in 1860 into the hillside like they did in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And their caverns are kind of underneath where the lead horses are. They actually built those above ground and then buried them, because that was the easiest way to do that. They got the first beer started in 1860. Now he knew he needed a partner to brew. He tried brewing, and it wasn't like winemaking. He was a pretty good winemaker, but brewing's a whole different skill. So he went looking for a partner up in where the Twin Cities is today, and he did find him. A fellow quite a bit older than him named Jacob Bernhardt, who was a master brewer, who agreed to come to New Ulm and start brewing. And so they purchased this land on the Cottonwood River, built these buildings and got started. Those first few years they did pretty well, They had problems that we don't usually face around here. One year the locusts ate everything you could brew with. Thin year for everybody. Now in those days, people sometimes ask me, well, did they make corn beer at first? Well, no. The corn monoculture that we've got nowadays, this is relatively new, just in my lifetime. When I was a small child, there were a lot of farmers that grew a wide variety of grains, and the homesteaders did too. They had some corn because that was good to feed the ox and the dairy cow, but they also the pigs. But they also had several acres of wheat because they could sell that.
Sure.
As a cash crop.
Party.
And barley and oats and things that they could feed the ox, because they didn't have horses; they had oxen, because they were much more sturdy. The only problem with an ox is they're so slow. 1 mile an hour is the fastest you're ever going to get an ox. So I think they had barley right away and wheat to brew with. They did pretty well. They survived the 1862 Dakota War. The buildings were intact. There was a little bit of damage, but they could fix that. In 1866, the partner wanted to sell his share because he wanted to go back to Europe.
Cool.
That's an interesting fact. I read this somewhere, and it makes sense. Those ships that carried the immigrants over in those years, they didn't go home empty.
I guess, yeah, no.
Up to a third of the people who immigrated to the United States ended up going back to Europe.
Really?
That's the estimate.
Wow.
Maybe up to that many.
Amazing.
That included Mr. Bernhardt. His health was failing. He died. My bet is he didn't want to get buried on the prairie. So they put the whole place up for sale to the highest bidder, rather than negotiate a price between themselves that might be unfair to one of them. The true market value of something is what somebody will pay at an auction, and so that's what they did, a slow motion auction. Mr. Schell was the high bidder with a bid of $12,000 for the whole operation.
All his.
Well, that's a lot of money in 1866.
Wow.
But it tells you they were prosperous.
Yes.
They did well. It's been in family control ever since. Every year they made more beer after that because there were more people moving in. There were more people around drinking it. Kids grew up, as they have a habit of doing. They had 3 girls and 2 boys that lived to adulthood. Their eldest son, Adolf, was supposed to take over for his dad. It was a tradition. They didn't get along. He was not Dad's favorite.
Ooh.
He started his career here, started a family in New Ulm, but while he was still a young man, he pulled up stakes, moved to California, planted orchards where Los Angeles is today.
Wow.
Can you imagine Los Angeles in about 1880 or so?
Nothing.
Imagine what that was like. No pollution, right? No freeways, no crowds,
Beautiful.
no winter.
Beautiful.
They didn't call it the City of Angels for nothing. He wasn't coming home. That wasn't going to happen. Well, his younger brother Otto was Dad's favorite. You can see pictures of him here. Here's Otto in his prime, around the turn of the century. Official portrait down there.
Nice.
Otto studied brewing in Germany for about a year in 1880. It was about the time the science of brewing got figured out. And so he came home with a lot of better ideas, understanding of making beer. He made some changes around here. His dad was suffering from severe arthritis by that time, so I think he had a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
He had big plans. He was going to build a big brew house, which he finally got done about the time his dad died in 1891. That building in front of it is a warehouse building. And after they got mechanical refrigeration, part of it became an aging cellar, essentially. Well, he was an inventor as well as a brewer. patented several devices used in the brewing process that you licensed other brewers for their use, making it more efficient or
Sure.
easier to do.
Yeah.
One thing he didn't share, though, is he made some changes to his brew kettle in an attempt to get more value out of hops while
Sure.
he was brewing it. You know, in the brewing process, there's a point where you've got the liquid that's come off of the grain, that you cook the grain in, and you literally brew it. You simmer it for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And that's where you add hops for flavor and for other good things. Well, the thing with hops is expensive. German brewers use 4 kinds of ingredients. For centuries, they had purity laws where they could only use these 4 types of ingredients: malted grain, yeast, water, and hops. Hops is a flavoring agent. It's bitter. If I gave you an unhopped beer, it would be cloyingly sweet. It'd be almost too sweet to really enjoy. So the hops balances the flavor, gives depth to the flavor. But even more importantly, it's the preservative in beer. Hops is a natural preservative, a natural antimicrobial, and pretty good at it too. But it's expensive. It's an expensive ingredient. It's grown on tall vines. There's a short window for harvest in the late fall, late summer, early fall. And once it's been harvested, it's fragile. It's susceptible to exposure to light. Light will change the flavor significantly. If you've ever had a beer, it'll change the flavor once it's been brewed into the beer with exposure to light. If you've ever had a beer that tastes or smells just a little skunky, it won't hurt you, just probably too much light got to the hops at some point. And so you try to keep it dark, you got to keep it cool. It's expensive. Well, he did this kind of feedback mechanism on his brew kettle so he could get more value out of the hops. He used less hops than any of his competitors, meaning he had a lower cost of production than anybody else
Cool.
around here at that point. Well, imagine the freedom that gives you as a business person. Your competitor can price their beer so they lose money and you're still going to make money. This is a recipe for prosperity, and they prospered. You know, they had some properties around southern Minnesota. They had a big ice house down in St. James on the lake there. That was their form of refrigeration in those days. And of course, they had ice houses here on the grounds too, and harvest off the river. But they could sell ice down there as well. They owned bars and taverns. And we can't do that now. We have a bar on our property.
Right, right.
Can't be in Minneapolis, can't be in Mankato, can't even be downtown in New Ulm. That's a violation of federal law.
Wow.
That's an antitrust violation. They don't have those laws then.
Nope.
No, those laws don't exist in parts of Europe. You walk into a bar in Amsterdam and all the tappers are Heineken products, you know who owns the bar.
Cool.
It's true in Britain too. You walk in, they're all Guinness products.
Yep,
You
yep.
know they own the bar. So that's kind of how it was around here. So they were doing real well. And look at it. I mean, this is a guy not to be trifled with. Look at him. Look at
Yeah.
this. He's proud of himself. He's,
A suit.
You know, he's part of that generation. You can tell who the managers are in this picture too. I mean, it's the guys in the 3-piece suits. Right? This guy's a salesman. There's no question.
Yeah, look at his
Look at the
face.
smirk on his face. This guy
Yeah.
sells stuff for a living. Yeah. So this is Otto. This is his brother-in-law George Marty. Turn of the century, they incorporated the business. You know, all the shareholders are a direct descendant of August Schell or a spouse of direct descendant. That's true even today. So that was in 1902, moving into the new century with confidence. 1911, though, Otto was 49 years old, had a short illness, unexpectedly died. Tough year for the family. His mother died that same year.
Oh, that's horrible.
But the family had business to attend to. Somebody had to run the brewery, be responsible for it. Now his sister Emma, the woman down here, wanted to run the brewery. She was capable of doing it, but you know, in 1911, not many people thought a woman should be running a brewery. Certainly that included her relatives. They offered the job to her husband, the guy next to her, George Marty, this guy. George had been a pharmacist. That was his first career. He had a license to practice pharmacy. He had drugstores up in the Twin Cities area, but for whatever reason, he was back in New Ulm working for his in-laws, keeping the books for them in 1911. Told the board that he wanted to start another pharmacy, but that a couple of years away, he'd run the brewery in the meantime. Well, that was 1911. When he died in 1934, he's still running the brewery. Now, Otto had a pretty good run of it, partially because it was a good time to be running a brewery. They had big boom and bust cycles in the general economy, but you know, brewing
That was kind of recession-proof as much as a business could be. Because it's the affordable luxury. Think about it. If you've lost all your money, you have a few coins left. Well, you buy a beer and you cry into it, right? You're still going to buy a beer. Well, things changed through no fault of George's at all. The world was just changing. You know, the U.S. was neutral in 1914 when war broke out in Europe between the English and French on one side and the Austrians and the Germans on the other. Most Americans wanted to stay neutral. One thought that I read about that made sense. Somebody said, we fought a war so we wouldn't have to fight the wars of the potentates of Europe. Why would we do it now?
Exactly.
Well, by 1916, the government had some pretty good ideas why they wanted to get involved on the side of the French and the English. But they had to change public opinion, which ran very strongly against the war. So they started a big public relations campaign, and they did it by making villains out of the Germans. They were monsters. They weren't even human. You can see this all online. It had a terrible effect on New Ulm. Three of our leading citizens got charged with sedition for what they said at a rally in 1917. Charges didn't get dropped till 1921. People covered up stuff that looked German. Some people changed their names.
Oh, yeah.
My great uncle, who grew up about an hour's drive west of here, when he got drafted, his given name was Herman. But from that point on, he was Butch till the day he died and afterwards, because that's what's on his tombstone, too. He wasn't going to be thought of as a Herman at that point. It was a tough time around here for that. That was probably a distraction for the brewery for the most part. But you know, after we started getting involved in war, all those guys going into the military were our best beer drinkers. I'm sure they felt the difference. The problem came in 1918 with the influenza pandemic. And we know what that's like a little bit, but we don't know how scary it was. See, in 1918, a lot of scientists had no idea there was such a thing as a virus. They didn't know what was happening. They couldn't explain it. It's just people were getting sick. Well, most people figured out you caught it by breathing infected air. A few years ago, I asked our CEO, Ted, during those years, how much of our beer was put in the kegs that we sold at taverns and bars? He says, probably 90% or more. Who's going to walk into one of those places and walk into there can kill you? And it could, too. Sales were dismal by the end of the year. 1919 brought its own problems. You know, there's a constitutional amendment that got approved outlawing the production, distribution, sale, or even consumption of alcoholic beverages. It's a federal offense to be tipsy.
That's
You can have up to 0.5% of alcohol by volume, about 1/10 of what is in the normal beer. So that's what they decided to do. It's called near beer. It's as dreadful as it sounds. The only way to get there to that 0.5% was to boil off the rest of the alcohol. And that process did not do the flavor any favors at all. That was the only process they had. Nowadays, you get a non-alcoholic beer, there's a number of different ways you can make it, but they didn't have those systems in 1920. Probably couldn't afford them even if they did exist. You could sell it, didn't sell as well. Around here, a lot of people just added back their own alcohol. They just didn't buy that from us. That was the change. We made soft drinks, including the root beer we recreate now as 1919 root beer. And they sold candies. You know, they distributed candies to their clients that used to be bars and taverns and now were coffee shops or cafes or whatever.
Sure.
Carried most of the major brands. They carried Hershey for a short time. And then they found out the Hershey family out in Pennsylvania were all staunch prohibitionists.
Oh, no.
That was the end of that. They were going to sell that stuff.
No way.
No way. Well, they limped their way through prohibition. Now, I've been accused of German stubborn a time or two. But 13 years while the money's flying out of your pocket, not knowing when it's going to end, that's real stubborn. That makes me look like a piker, I'll tell you. But they made it. They made it to the end. Now, making the near beer was a favor for them at that point. All they had to do was not boil off the alcohol. They had the real stuff to sell. The instant it became legal to do so. Depths of the Depression, but again, the affordable luxury.
Right,
They did better
right.
than you might think, I think. George died in 1934. Emma took over. Was our CEO for 6 years until her death in 1940, and then son Al took over just in time for another war with the Germans.
Oh,
Whole
jeez.
other story. Whole different world around here. You know,
Really?
whole different attitude about German heritage. After the war, you think things would get better, but then the problem became the industry itself. In the year 1900, there was nearly 2,000 breweries in this country operating, almost all locally owned like Schell's. By 1978, there were 89.
Wow.
95% of those facilities were gone. And they were down to 45 ownerships. That was it. That included Schell's. That was the whole industry. It was possible because most people wanted one type of beer, standard American lager. And most breweries in this country made one type of beer. For us, it was our Deer brand. If you've had a Budweiser or a Pabst or a Miller, you know what a standard lager is. Most Americans, there were marketing studies. They did blind taste tests. They figured out most American consumers couldn't find their own favorite beer in a blind taste test of 5 beers because they were all so much alike. Well, how do you sell more beer under those conditions? You either have to undersell them or you have to advertise more, both of which cost far more than we could afford. They did the best they could with a good local clientele, but it was tough for Al. And when he retired in the 60s, his son Warren took over, and it was tougher still. Very popular guy in town, Warren, named Schmaltz. Finally, by the late 70s, there was a point where they thought they were going to have to close, and we're going to be able to make payroll pretty soon. Well, what did they do during Prohibition? They sold off some property. You know,
Sure.
they whittled themselves down. All that stuff was gone 2 generations ago. What was Warren going to do? He found it right here. Here's a sample. Black walnut trees.
Sure. Yeah, they're great.
One of them was the tallest black walnut tree in North America by many standards. This is a branch. This
You're
isn't a tree.
kidding.
This was one of the branches.
Oh my
First
goodness.
branch was 31 feet above the ground. Perfectly straight. You could make very wide swaths of veneer with it. This was what those buyers wanted. There were foreign buyers that were paying very high dollar for that kind of wood. They sold several other trees too. It's tough to sell a legacy, but that saved the brewery. After that thing started picking up, craft brewing became a thing.
Sure.
Ted took over in the 80s. He'd been trained as a brewmaster in Germany. He could make an argument we've been a craft brewer since 1860. We just had a bigger kettle than some of those guys. We made our Deer brand, and they're light because they're good beers. They're still good beers, and they're still easy sellers for us. People buy them. Ted started making different kinds of beers, seasonal beers, specialty beers. He started doing contract brewing for other brewers. You know, because all those beers are so much alike, you could use their recipe, their packaging. Then they wouldn't have to cart their own beer halfway across the continent to sell it in the Midwest. You could just haul it and stayed away. Funny thing about beer is beer doesn't travel that well. You know, we all know that wine doesn't. You hear about wine, you hear about bottle shock, they call it. You take wine over a long distance, you gotta let it sit there for a while, get used to where it's at. Seriously, even this bottle is sealed in the bottle. Because barometric pressures, things, temperatures, it all varies. Beer is always best closest to where it's been made. It always is. I'm not a fan of Miller Lite. It's one of my least favorite beers. When I visited the Miller Brewery about 15, 20 years ago, even the light beer tasted good. Well, it never left the factory. It was 100 yards from where they made it.
Right, right.
In the tap room. You know, they brought it in on a hand cart. You know. It's travel does have an effect on it. Well, in 1998, they built a new brew house, modernized. In 2002, Ted was able to buy the Grain Belt, big Minneapolis brewery for many years. The actual production facility was closed in the 70s already. We have the studio and office space. And so the owners after that were buying beer from producers like Schell. And they were having trouble matching up demand and supply. So Ted bought the labels. Big ask. Big purchase. But it put us into overdrive. Suddenly we had access to all those beer drinkers in Minneapolis and we're buying our beer before. It's been a whole different world ever since. Ted and Jody have 3 kids. They're all young men in their 30s and 40s. They're all involved in the business. Well, their eldest is no longer with the brewery right now. He and a partner started a distillery. But Kyle will take over, the middle son, when Dad retires, and the youngest son, Franz, is, well, his brothers call him the Swiss Army knife of the brewery because there's nothing here he can't do. I call him the hardest working man in the brewery because I never see him sit down. Well, let's take a walk. Let's go out to the store and make room for our next commercial. And We're gonna go to the packaging department and then the old brew house and then to the can rooms.
She's curious.
Okay, send me a picture later. Okay, I love you. Okay, bye.
I was dying of thirst. I hope I don't lose my group. Oh, I guess they're up there. Just have to stop for some water. It's really, really hot. It's gotten hotter than it was earlier. I'm so grateful for that water. Oh, I just thought I was going to pass out. Boy, is it ever hot. We're not going to stand out here too long, I hope.
We won't.
Oh, good.
That's the 1860 house, still here. We raised 5 kids in there. We can fit in 1 office worker. What's changed? Lots of things have changed. Original brew house has been built over, changed around many times over the decades.
Well, I
The
hope
stucco
I
house.
step in the shade. So oh. Oh, man. It is extremely hot. Sorry I can't hear him, but I'm not going to stand in that bright sunshine. Sorry, guys. Man, I thought I was going to have a medical emergency and pass out.
That one. Yep. $5,000.
What would that be in today's money? About
If you go
yeah.
down to the center of town, there's another fancy house that was built for a local lawyer, a guy named John Wynn, who later became governor.
Oh, of course.
The Wynn House was also built in 1885 for a cost of about $5,000. So that's what a fancy house costs.
Are you going to their social tomorrow? I am. They're having a social tomorrow.
Yep, they're
I'm-
they actually have an ice cream social down there to pay for roofing. It's a very expensive process to roof it. It's a non-profit now that owns the building. They rent out some space to other non-profits. You can rent the place for receptions and things like that. We're going to go on the other side of the house here, but into someplace much cooler.
Good. Thought I was going to pass out. Oh. I don't know how people can stay outside with the breeze. Oh, it's gotten really super hot. Hi, Pete. Oh, there he is. Hi, Peacock. Aren't you pretty? Oh my gosh, you're so cute. He's trying to stay in the shade just like me. Oh, I thought I didn't know what I was gonna do. Oh, thank you. Thanks. Oh, good.
That poor bird
Oh, it's
is
so dang
standing
hot.
all afternoon.
Oh.
Those birds are strange. A couple of years ago, I spent some time online searching and searching to find anything written about normal peacock behavior. All I could find was genetic information. You know, I couldn't use that. And last fall, there was a guy speaking in town. We've seen him before. He's from over by Albert Lee, a guy named Al Bat. You might know Al.
Oh, Bat is great.
Al is a wonderful storyteller, naturalist. He's a bird expert, mostly wildlife type birds. But I asked him after his presentation. I said, Al, is there anything you can tell me about normal peacock behavior? And he looked at me and he said, I don't think there is such a thing. They're just weird birds.
They're showy.
They're omnivores, they'll eat anything. They'll eat worms and grubs and grain, and they'll pick at your flowers. And if they can catch a mouse, it's not a pretty sight.
Ew.
Mouse.
They eat mice.
And you look at their claws, they can defend themselves when they're fully grown. We have them, they just run around on the grounds here. The two we have here like to stay right on the ground. So we've had them that want to wander through the neighborhoods too, and they always come back because they have good feed here. They've got places to roost. They can defend themselves against coyotes.
You're kidding.
Yeah, well, they can, yeah.
With their
Just-
claws,
Mhm.
and they
Yeah,
just.
they'll put up a fight that a turkey or pheasant or other birds usually don't, because they're pretty.
Scrappy.
They don't usually attack us unless we're attacking them. I like to tell people that they're domestic, but they're not particularly tame. Now this guy puts the lie to all of that
Yeah.
as you walk past, because
Yeah,
he's
he
just
did.
as friendly as can be. Last year he walked right across my feet while I was giving a tour.
Cute.
Brought his feathers brushing against my leg. And going, buddy, you're just too close. Get over there where you're supposed to be.
Do they all have names?
Oh yeah, I think this one's Barney. The other one's Frank. We got two males right now.
Barney.
Last time we had a female, when she had her chicks, she built her nest right, basically blocking the door into the main office building.
Oh, smarty.
So they had to go down where the beer garden is and in the back door to get to work for several weeks.
Weeks,
She was
yeah,
raising
isn't
those
that
chicks.
sweet?
That was the last time we had hens. I don't know.
No, that's right.
Yeah. So we've only got two males right now. It's like a peacock model story around here. Well, a few years ago, they blocked off this alleyway. This is just not too long before I started giving tours. And put these packaging machines here because the building behind me back here is mostly for cellaring. It's mostly where we're aging beer. And so it's a good place to put it in between. The machine right in front of us is the bottling machine. That's a little older. The one on the far end is a canning machine in the cabinet, but they work about the same way, just different packaging materials. They'll run one or the other, not both at the same time, but they both run about the same speed to keep pace with the rest of the packaging line. That comes out to about a 6-pack per second, about 360 units per hour.
That's
So they can
crazy.
do, if it's a really busy day, they can do about 5,000 cases in a shift. That's
That's
120,000
fast.
cans.
That is fast.
As breweries go, we're small. But I was talking with the head brewer. We had kind of a meeting earlier this week for information for tour guides and people working in the beer hall. And he told me that on a really busy day, he can go through 25,000 pounds of grain. And the grain comes in. Our base grain, the one we use the most of, is a malted barley. We buy it from RAR up in Shakopee. And they'll send a hopper truck down here. It's 24 ton, 48,000 pounds. And it gets vacuumed into our storage silo. And that takes a couple hours usually, or more. And they usually come in the evening. That was, I think, Tuesday evening when we had that meeting. And I parked in his way. But I saw the truck through the window and I went, oh.
Yeah,
And I
how do you
had to run up
park?
and move the car quick so he could get into place.
Right.
Other malted grain comes from Europe or from other parts of the United States. We buy quite a bit from Greece and Wisconsin. They're a family-owned business, but they've been malting for many years.
So they don't run on the weekends. This would run
Nope.
during the weekdays.
Nope, they don't run on the weekend. Now, occasionally this time of year, if the demand is high enough, they might do a Saturday shift for the packaging crew. Now, during the summer, they'll come in well before dawn. They're done by noon,
Ooh,
clean up and everything, because it's way too hot to be there later. in the
sure, yeah.
Brew house is like that too. The brew house right now probably is 115 to 120 degrees in there.
No, it's horrible.
Yeah, and so they had to build a separate little building inside the brew house, just the air conditioning. for the
Sure.
hotels.
It's too hot.
But it's hot. That's just the way it is. That's brewery. Once the bottles and cans get done in here, they go across the way to the pasteurizer. Another source of heat, of course. Once that's done, bottles get their labels, and then there's a machine that puts them in 12 packs or 6 packs or cases, whatever configuration is needed. Now, it used to be if they changed from one of those configurations to another, they have to go in there with wrenches and move stuff around and kind of reconfigure it. Now, most of the changes can be done with a software command.
Cool. That's
So
awesome.
it saves a lot of labor. Once in a while, they'll have to make a couple of changes if they go to some kind of unusual packaging. But eventually, everything's on a pallet, all nicely tacked down, you know. They take that onto the loading dock and straight onto the semi-trailer. There's no room for a warehouse on the grounds. And so the warehouse is about a mile away through town. So the guys that are driving, once they've got everything ready in the semi, they have to back through where we were standing
Yeah,
between the buildings.
yeah, that's hard.
On a hillside, on a curve.
Ooh, no.
Maybe it's icy in the winter.
They
You have to
ran-
avoid people like me and the peacocks and everybody
And the
else.
peacocks, yeah.
The peacocks know enough to get out of their way. They figured that out. And, you know, then as soon as that end gate starts heading down to the parking lot, there comes a point where they can make a sharp turn and go out the lane we all came in on. Now, that's the only way to get a vehicle in and out. And back before Greenbelt was acquired, that street was a gravel road. It was narrower than what it is today. No retaining walls, hardly any guardrails. The ravine isn't any less steep.
Yeah, that's right. It is scary.
And I think there was one street light between here and the Junior Pioneer Park where it goes on a 90-degree turn.
Crazy.
So, yeah, it's a whole different world since they got Greenbelt. Now, I wasn't involved with the brewery in those days. When Ted bought Greenbelt, I saw the news and I thought, oh, he's gonna have to build a new brewery.
Right, right.
You know, put it on the edge of town or something, like get the trucks in and out easy. He figured out how to do everything here.
How big is the distribution of grain belt?
Well, it's for both beers. It's Minnesota and the surrounding states, and then parts of eastern Nebraska. I do know there's a distributor in Pittsburgh, of all places, that
Wow.
will carry us on special order.
Cool.
The reason I know this, so I'm giving a tour a few years ago. This was before the pandemic, and there's a woman on the tour, and it was kind of off season. I think it was like February or March. She'd grown up in somewhere northwest here, I think Gibbon or someplace like that. But she lived in Ohio now. That's where she and her family lived. And her husband had been wanting to build a man cave in the basement for years and put in a tapper, and she finally agreed. She finally said, "Oh, fine, go ahead and do it, but I get to choose the first beer."
Beer, yeah.
Firebrick is her favorite beer, which is one of our best sellers. So she called up this place in Pittsburgh, about 2 hours drive from where she was living in eastern Ohio. And the distributor said, "Oh yeah, I can get that. It'll be a couple of weeks. I'll call you when it comes in." So we're talking, half barrel, 16 gallons plus. And the guy calls her, and her husband's out of town on business, so she and the girlfriend got in the SUV and drove into Pittsburgh, found the distributor, got the keg put in the car, drove home. The two of them were able to figure out to get that keg out of the car and down into the basement. They got it into the cooler and everything hooked up and it would actually pour. And
Cool.
success.
Nice.
Said, "Okay, tomorrow we drink beer." Next morning, she found out she was pregnant. She never got a drop.
Oh, man.
She's standing there on the other side of the bar from me at the tap room, and I said, "Oh, well, how's the kid? You like the kid?" "Yeah, the kid's great." "Oh, okay."
But
I got
not.
lots of fireworks. Here, you want another one? No, you have plenty of sense. But I found out that you could get it from that distributor.
And they used to give beer to babies too, didn't they?
Oh yeah. Well, they used to give not that long ago. They would still prescribe beer for lactating mothers
Oh, jeez.
as basically a nutritional supplement. Don't know whether it's good or bad. They tend not to do that now.
No, no.
We're going to go this way.
Okay.
And we'll go out
Brain
down
cell
on the other
factor.
side and go into the old brew house. Which is going to be a little more.
Oh, it feels so much better. I thought I was going to die out there. Oh, man.
I love this poster. Why does anybody wear bowler hats to work anymore?
Oh, yeah. Cool. Very proper English.
Wear a tie with your work shirt.
Yeah, right.
Dirty overalls.
And I can do the
It's
sauna.
got shady in this
The
corner.
sweltering sauna.
Yeah.
Mach-
First thing when we go in that door, you're going to see is a great big machine built into the floor. That's a steam engine. That was a compressor for the first mechanical refrigeration they installed probably in 1900. Of course, we're not running steam anymore, but we did electric compressors in the background. It's cool. Because we haven't opened up the doors on the storage on the accelerating areas, they're not all running right now. It's going a little lighter, even as hot as it is. Now that steam engine, about the second or third year I was giving tours, there was a guy on my tour and he pulled me aside and said, I'm a licensed boiler operator. For the first 20 years of my career, I ran a machine exactly like the one you guys
Amazing.
see. Exactly.
Wow.
And I asked him, I thought about this, I said, how much noise did it make?
Yeah, yeah.
He said it was silent. You lubricate it properly, the only thing you hear is occasionally a pressure valve letting a little steam loose.
Amazing.
That was it. A
If
couple
it's-
years ago, I was helping Ted give a longer tour on the grounds here, and he told the same story. He said it was silent. You couldn't hear it running. Compare that to the noise from the electrics. It was a quieter time in those days. The steam engines would run quiet. Well, once we're in the door, we'll turn right and step down between the buildings. And when we get past the other set of doors, the screen doors there, we'll go up 2 flights of stairs to the brew kettle on the 2nd floor. Now watch your step going up. They're very sturdy steps, but the last 2 steps are slightly farther apart than the other steps on the stairs.
Uh-oh.
Not enough that your eye will notice, but your toe might notice that. We don't want you to have to.
What's that thing sticking out?
Well, it's a storage tank. That's an aging tank. When I first started giving tours, my surmise, my guess about it was that either the tank was available for a low price, cheap, or somebody mismeasured, which would be true if I were the one measuring. Well, Ted told me a story while he was giving that tour one shot. He told us the story. He bought several of those tanks. They were made for somebody else, and he didn't take delivery. So the manufacturer sold it at a discount.
Of course.
And he needed them. He needed them for expansion. And there were several, and they went into that portion of the building like this. And this one was supposed to go like this. It was supposed to pivot 90 degrees. Now, have you ever watched that Friends episode where Ross is trying to, his friends are trying to get the sofa up a stairway, and he keeps saying pivot, pivot, and of course there's no way you can pivot. That's what happened here. That's exactly what happened with that. It just wasn't room to get it situated. And so they finally just gave up, put it in like that, and improvised. Now, if you ever watch Red Green on television, he has
Yeah.
wonderful sayings, one of which fits this perfectly. He goes, it's only temporary unless it works.
That's right. That's right. Unless it works.
What?
Thank you. Here's your step. Well, up we go, and the last 2 steps at the top are wider, so you might. Oh.
Okay, all right, you made it.
Yeah. I had to take it slow though.
Oh, that's good. You made it forward.
Oh.
How they built the 1890s, vertically like this. You start the product at the top of the building, and gravity will pull the product through the stages
Wow.
of production. So it's they built it along the hillside, so they didn't even need a mechanical elevator. They needed to have rain at the top of the building, and they take the same rain out and just drag it up the hillside. Really didn't know where they got it up. Saved a bunch of money when they built the place.
No elevator.
One last thing to go in and install was this copper kettle. No particular design, it's just They thought they ordered it plenty of time from the German manufacturer, and then they gave it 2 years to get here. The Germans didn't understand that one.
Wow.
Probably got lost in some warehouse on the East Coast. They finally figured out they had to put it on the train, so it's not got here. The kettle alone cost $25,000 when we used to war when they installed it. That was just a couple years after they built that house. 5 times what that house cost. It was incredible. But they worked it for 108 years, 107 years. 1998, the new house was built into the hillside right over there. Of course, that's more on one level. We have good technology. We got quieter in here. Somebody asked me last year, is this part of the museum? And I couldn't really say no. No one could tell. I don't know what they have planned for this area typically. But it has a certain charm. You know, if you build a factory today, would anybody do flower cutouts on their stair rises? Where would you get a post like this? It's just standard material. People should get it, but they go on to replace that handrail. That's just been standard for the construction stuff.
Beautiful. Very beautiful.
And the nervous some way when you duplicate it. Yeah, a couple coming here, they were probably in the 50s, 40s, 50s. Bikers. Leathers and the whole thing, the rubbers. Probably early spring when they came by, first baby red. And I just had the 2 of them on the floor. And when we got up here, took one look around and went, steampunk!
Oh yeah, steampunk. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
Totally. Yeah.
This got a certain style of its own. There was great nostalgia on the part of the family for this facility. So I don't know what if anything can happen to it. This is where Ken Holmes grew. His parents were the last full-time residents of that mansion. After that, Ken and his wife only had a good place to stay. And the truth is, living where you work is not always back up. When I was a young man and didn't know any better, I was working at a radio station. One time I lived about a block from the studios. It was terrible. Guess he got the call because it wasn't his job. That happens. So the boys also lived somewhere in town. But it's interesting. A couple of things about brewing. I've noticed over the years, so I'm not the most savvy guy in terms of how breweries run and with that many other breweries, but I've never run into a brewery that didn't have a sense of music. Didn't have something whimsical about it. It could be the names of the beer, like that outfit in Montana, their main product is called Moose Drool. The winter beer is called Yellow Snow. I don't know.
That's great.
But it shows up here, we'll have fanciful names for beers. Or it could be job titles. It could be anything in the organization that has this music. For 15 years in a row, my wife and I go to a music festival in Colorado. It's actually happening this weekend. It's a little nostalgic. 50 years since we did it. One of the main sponsors of that music festival was Fat Tire Beer. It was the New Belgian Brewery in Fort Collins, Colorado. And so one day I'm on the grounds of the festival, and they have their display tent set up as a sponsor, and I go and talk to the woman who's taking care of it. She's an employee of the brewery. And I lived in Iowa at the time. It turns out she'd gone to Iowa State University. And the degree was in environmental engineering. And that's the job she had at the brewery, but her business card did not say environmental engineer. That wasn't her title. Her title was sustainability goddess. Whimsy. Why is that? Well, I got another clue on this a couple years ago, about 2 years ago. I think it was last year. When the tour guides all had a gathering one evening, and the whole purpose was to ask our CEO anything about the brewery, about the history, about the beer, whatever. Questions that came up that we couldn't answer during tourism. And he answered a number of questions, and he was going to be there as long as anybody had a question. Well, one of the other tour guides who's been doing this longer than me, he grew up in town. He had family who'd been here for generations. He had his Well, he says, Ted, what's your favorite part of the brewery? Well, that's a great question. Because he is the expert. He knows this place better than any living person. And I thought he'd say something like unforgettable, because he's been photographed with it a number of times, or someplace in the production line, or maybe something else. He didn't hesitate. He said the beer garden.
Of course.
Well, we'd only had the beer garden for about 10 years at that point. Before that, we couldn't sell you a beer as a consumer. Couldn't give you one as a sample. But, you know, when the legislature changed the law to make it possible to have a beer pong, they put a cap on it. So if you made more than 25,000 barrels a year, you couldn't sell directly to the distributor. And then they changed that so we could sell an open container, sell a glass. And that's when they opened the beer garden right away. Well, I got to thinking about it. I play in a little band that plays on Sunday afternoons here 3 times a year.
He's really good. If you ever hear Lee Weber, check him out on the internet, and he's fantastic.
It's a nice club. Well,
Really good.
they, and oftentimes I'll see that now. That's how they're all at. What is cooler than this, of course, that beer garden is a lovely, lovely place. It's just the best venue in town. And I finally figured out, I think, it's my opinion, why he said the beer garden. And that's because you can sit there and you can watch the results of his life's work. Here is hard work. It's hard work, whether you're the CEO, or you work in the brew house. You know, those brew house guys, they don't look like me. They have broad shoulders and exactly the opposite. Because they're working hard. That brew, you know, think it's warm in here? It's probably 120 degrees in the brew house right now. It's just the way it is. Especially if they're doing up a batch. So, it's hard physical labor that takes it out of you. And you have to wait to get the results. Now, because we're so precise, consistency is a thing we're good at that. But there's always that question mark. Because the grain's always different. Every batch of grain's different.
Yep, it's like being a farmer.
Moisture contents by a little bit, they have different protein contents sometimes by a big amount. It's all makes a difference. So, you have to wait for the result. The whimsy, the playfulness, is taking that joy from the end of the process and moving it back to the beginning of the process. You have fun while you're doing the hard work. That explains the whimsy, that explains Ted's preference for the beer garden. That explains my preference for the beer garden. That's what we do sometimes, you know? And they give me beer too.
He's a beer garden boy.
So, last stop, we're going to go downstairs. It'll be a little warm outside, but we're going to hug alongside of this building. And we're going to go to the caverns.
Yay!
I'm going to stand here and hang. Watch the film. Let's jump up.
Should bring your guitar.
Well, you know, it's like anything you have in your house. You know where the footstool is, so you know to dodge it. And you're walking through it without your glasses. It's a dark. I don't even notice that thing anymore, but I have to keep telling myself
It's there.
you know, fresh eyes what it looks like people left in here.
Yeah, really. Last thing you want is pulling someone off the ground.
Okay, off you go.
And that's how it gets there.
Semi-truck loaded. All the grain comes in. It's 24 tons.
Huh.
Vacuum it into the silo.
Wow.
It takes a while. A couple hours of work.
I wonder what the temperature is. I bet it's over 90 degrees.
Oh, yeah, it's well over 90 out here.
Well, this is fun.
Heat up.
Not a good thing.
Lee, how long have you been touring? How long have you been doing these tours?
Oh, probably 10 years.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome.
When I started.
You love history. That's great.
Well, it's the best story in town.
Oh, yeah.
Full of great stories.
And what a special day. What a historic time.
It is.
165 years.
Wish we had better weather.
Oh,
We were 20 degrees cooler.
right, right. I know I'm sensitive to heat.
We have more people out here.
That's right. That's right. Will you be playing soon here?
Pardon?
Will you be playing again here soon?
Pretty soon.
Okay.
The end of July, I think.
I'll be here.
It's then the weekend before Labor Day. We always
Awesome.
do the weekend before Labor Day because Labor Day is the hobo band.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I love them too. Whoa. Here's the tap room. That's what we've all been waiting. Ooh, nice. Oh, for cute. Look at this.
Have a seat for a minute.
Holy moly. Look
Cooler
at.
down here.
Oh, wow.
Smells a bit like here. And kids in my last group, everyone walked in and said, "It smells like alcohol." How do you know? What are your parents doing? Okay, well, this was the tap room for quite a few years before they built another one above us. That's now an employee break room. We have a tap room in the visitor center. But it used to be that it wasn't really a tour. You just come down and help yourself to some beer.
Right, right.
And it got so that there was a certain group of otherwise unemployed men that would show up with a sack lunch and a deck of cards and just sit here and play beer until they got chased out.
Oh, my goodness.
And then they go down to Houndstein, a mile down the road, and they do the same thing to them.
Oh, my goodness.
And then they got kicked out there, they come back here. Now, Al Marty had the tapper here, but he had a valve up in his office. He could just turn the valve and shut it off. And he decided he'd been drinking too much. Al's kind of an interesting character. I never met him. I never met his son either. Never met Warren of Ted's dad. But I asked Ted one time if his grandfather was the type of person who would pull your leg. He said, it's most definitely a practical joker. But I remember a guy in town, he's still with us, Denny Warda.
Oh, yeah.
Denny told me a story one time that Al told him. Denny kind of took it as gospel, and I think he was getting his leg pulled. Denny would be a young man when he heard this. And Al told him that when Prohibition ended, we were making the near beer, and people were adding back alcohol on their own, which was grain alcohol, which was corn alcohol.
Ugh.
And so that's where they got the alcohol. They got used to the taste of corn alcohol, because depending on which grain you make the alcohol from, it'll have a different flavor. And so when we started making it with the barley, at full strength after Prohibition ended, people were saying, well, why doesn't it taste the same as it did before? Well, they added corn to the recipe so that it would taste. No, they always had corn in the recipe.
Oh, corn.
He was just pulling his leg, I'm sure. Beer, when they brew it like that, will have oftentimes more than one grain involved.
Oh, sure.
Because the beer always, the grain always has to be malted before you brew. Well, malting is a pretty simple process that specialists do it. Places like Rar and Shakopee or Breese in Wisconsin, or we buy malts from European malt houses as well. But what they do is they take the grain and they soak it until it germinates. It starts to grow. Then they drain it and roast it. And usually they have like drum roasters, but they'll roast it until it's dry, and they'll roast it until it's whatever color you want. So that's where the color in beer comes from. If they roast it longer, it's darker.
Right.
You get more of that roasted flavor, just like you would with coffee or a piece of toast even.
But it doesn't change the alcohol content, or does it?
Alcohol is a whole different part of the process.
Oh, okay.
So the color makes no difference
No
on
difference.
the alcohol.
Wow.
And the just depends how much sugar is in the grain. Is oftentimes will help determine that. What they're really doing though is they're studying an enzyme process that will continue through the first steps of the brewing process that converts starches into sugars. Because yeast can't do anything with starches, but sugar they will consume and they will excrete alcohol and CO2. Now, my brother-in-law who makes wine uses a much earthier word than excrete. But it's the same idea. He claims that yeast are the best pets. See, because they don't poop on the rug, they don't keep the neighbors awake at night. They work until they're done and then they die. Perfect pets. Well, so that's what they're doing with the malting, and that conditions the grain so it's ready for brewing. So it's the sugars that come off the grain like that the yeast consumes during the fermentation process. And if there's a lot of sugar left over, because it just depends on the configuration of the sugar, the enzymes will actually cut the starches together and the sugars up in pieces that the yeast can use. But if it's configured in a way that the yeast isn't going to use it, that just stays in the beverage. So if you have a thick beverage, and this is true of wine too, if it's thick in the glass, it sticks to the sides. That's sugar. You call it syrupy? You're exactly right. It's syrupy. Now it's like our Bach beer in the late winter is thick enough that we poke it.
Right, caramelize it.
Yeah, you take a red hot poker out of the fire, literally. Put it in the middle of the beer, watch it foam, take it out. What that does is that takes that extra sugar and caramelizes it. Changes the flavor a little bit, smooths it out.
Good.
It is pretty good. I always get a little bit of ash with it from the fire. So
Oh no.
But now you can't do that with a light beer. Impossible. Because the way you get a light beer is have as close to zero extra sugar in it as possible.
Oh,
That's where
okay.
all the calories come out.
Come out.
And about the limit is you can get down to somewhere in the 95 to 98% calorie range for a 12-ounce bottle. If you want to go lower than that, you have to start taking out alcohol. You have to water it down. But getting the sugar out means that they're very careful in the brewing process to set it up so the yeast will consume all the sugar. It's
Sure.
harder to make a light beer
Really?
than a
Wow.
regular beer. And so, it's just a more demanding process and more demanding of the quality or the nature of the ingredients that go in. Our light beer, our Schell's Light, was developed in the late 70s. We actually apparently hired a consultant to come and design the beer. He's also the consultant that Miller hired to do the first light beer on the market, Miller Lite. I like to say, he made his mistakes for Miller and he made a better beer for us.
There you go.
I think he's right. I think that's true, though. I do think it's true. As you look at me, I'm not a light beer drinker. But the only light beer that I find palatable is Schell's Light.
I'll have to get some.
And it's best here on the brewery grounds. You haven't had to move very far. Well, if you go in through that door and to the right, watch your step and watch your head because it's a really low door, but you can get down into one of the caverns that we created in
Cool.
1960. You can take a look at that. And it's cooler down there than it is here.
Thank
a little
goodness.
damper, but it's also cooler. And we can take a look at that. So.
Sweltering. Oh. I'll let you lead the way because I'll get lost in the caverns and that'll be the end of
It's
me.
impossible to get lost.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, I would have.
Oh, this is fun.
So watch your step going down. It's a low ceiling. You got a duct. Let's put it this way: we're not posting the timber wolves in this place.
Oh, boy, yeah. And they were really short back in the days. The Wanda Gog is so short, the ceilings, it's...
Yeah, this is very short. Now, what they did with this is they built this above ground with masonry and stone, and then buried it because it was safer and easier to do it that way than to try and dig it into the hillside.
Look at that,
But it
wow.
was just as effective, of course. Now, they used ice for refrigeration down there. You can imagine how damp and dank it was. It didn't have a cement floor. When they went to mechanical refrigeration, any place that you could insulate now could be an aging source. And it was a better quality place to age beer because you could control the temperature much more accurately. And these ones kind of ended up being long-term storage for things you didn't want to think about. Now, I remember reading somewhere that Jace Marty, his oldest son, that Ted sent him down here as a high school kid. I think he did the pile too. He said, clean up the caverns. Jace said, I think he was just trying to figure out if we'd actually do it. But they did it. They got it a lot cleaner. They were eventually putting electricity, well, they didn't have electric at that point. And there's another cabin about the same size that we don't have open right now. But you notice the barrels, we do make one beer down here every year. For holiday season, we make something called cave-aged barrel aged. It's exactly that. It's aged, it's a thick, heavy beer. It's aged in the used bourbon barrels. We usually buy them from a distillery that offers them to us at the least price. They'll price them out and just take whichever one's the best price. This time it was Tattinger. Last year, before, I think it was Four Roses. I think we've had them from Buffalo Trace before. But they aged that beer in the caverns, in those kegs, in those beer barrels, those whiskey barrels. And so it gets some of that whiskey flavor in it as well.
Nice.
It's a very rich flavored beer, very thick, a lot of extra sugars in it, and it's about 10% alcohol.
Whoa.
So it's a sipper.
It's a sipper.
Now people ask me about the temperature that they drink beer at.
Yeah.
Why do Europeans sometimes have it warmer than us? Cold dampens your ability to taste.
Oh,
It
okay.
takes away your ability to taste, and you know that. If you bite your tongue real hard, you put an ice cube in there to kind of help keep it from getting ached too badly. If somebody tells me, this is my favorite beer, but it has to be ice cold, in my mind, I may not say it to their face, but in my mind I'm thinking, you better check the quality of your beer, pal.
Right, right, right,
You know,
right.
Rethink the quality of your beer. If you can't drink it at room temperature, it may not be worth drinking.
Right,
is my
right.
feeling. There's not a beer they make here that I don't drink at room temperature. I'm just fine with it. That cave aged, I can't drink it cold. It's so strong, by the time I'm done, it's gonna be room temperature.
Right, that's right.
It's a sipper. It's a sipper, but you get more flavor there. Hops does the same thing, actually. When you get those super hoppy beers, one taste, and it just numbs my mouth completely. You could probably do dental work. It takes an hour or two for my feeling back in my mouth. I don't find that a pleasant experience. No, I think hops affects people differently. I have a nephew, husband of my niece. He loves super hoppy beers, but hops don't affect him as much that way. He's some people eat hot sauce. They
Right.
just sit there, they're not even
Yeah,
spraying.
no.
It's really frustrating. I have a little taste of it and I'm ready for the hospital.
Right,
And
right.
I'm as white as I look, I guess. Everything's bland. I'm Norwegian, partially German, the other part. So that's the end of the tour. But thank you for coming. Thank you for being on it.
Are we going to
sure
get a
appreciate you.
sampling?
Not on this tour. The tours that we had today, we're not using.
Oh,
not having
I've
the
already
tapper.
sampled it in
Yeah,
the beer
you
garden.
already know what
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
doing.
yeah.
So yeah, watch your step going up the steps here. Watch your
Okay.
head.
So
And,
is that coinage or those dollars in there a tip for you? Is that going
yeah,
to
those
you?
are, that's
It's for
tip,
you.
That's tip for all the tour guys.
Okay,
We split
just-
the tips at the end.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, because I thought maybe you were selling something down here.
No,
Okay.
not selling anything, just information.
Good job, Lee.
You know, offering.
Thank you.
Thank you. But thanks for the thought.
All right. Well, I was wondering. I have to leave you something, so that was the tour. I almost passed out, but it was so hot.
Okay, yeah, we can get out of here before the next tour hits us.